Hey, so this is the first episode of this walkthrough I'll be doing for the CodeSignal Arcade section. We'll start with the pretty easy problems, which shouldn't be too hard to explain, and we'll just cover around 10 minutes of problems for each video. Um, we'll start with the first one, which we actually solved in the last episode. Here, we just want to return the sum of two numbers. I'm using Python. You can use whatever programming language you're most comfortable with. In Python, when you want to return the value, like the output of the method, you just write return. And here you can put whether it's an operation or a value. So here it's an operation, but I could also do this. So out sum equals param1 plus param2. And then just write here out sum. And that is pretty much the exact same thing. You can also just create a list there if you want your output to be an actual list, but there's like many other options. As I mentioned before, this first problem is pretty much trivial, so let's just go to the next one. So here we want to know from a year, so let's say we get 1905, the century. So in most cases, what we want is to take the first two digits and add 1. So first, let's write return. Now, to get the first two digits, we'll want to divide the year by 100. And just to make sure that this is actually an integer, which we can just write int. So this will return the year divided by 100 cast as an integer. So that will mean that we'll get 19.05, and then we'll just ignore the decimal points, and that's the value that we get. But 1905 is the 20th century, so we get the 19 plus 1. Finally, there's an edge case that we have to account for. So if the year is the 1700s, that's the last year of the 17th century. So we have to make sure that when we receive 1700, we do not get 18 as an output. You can do this pretty easily by simply just subtracting 1 from the year. There. So if you get 1700, this will become 1699, which will then return 16 plus 1 is 17. While if you get 1701, that will just subtract 1, you will still have 17 plus 1, that's 18. So we can just run the tests here. We passed all the sample tests, and you can just submit the problem, and that's pretty much it. We can just go to the next task. And this one is the first one that's actually a bit trickier, because it requires you to know a bit more. Here you pretty much just have to know how strings work in Python. A string is pretty much just an array of characters. So here, the input string AABAA is just pretty much AA. The AABAA linked together. And we want to check if this is a palindrome. If you don't know, a palindrome is simply just a word that read backwards is the exact same thing. So yeah, the first thing we have to check is this third condition. So if your input string is just a single character, that is a palindrome, because of course if you just a letter can be read backwards and it's still the same letter. So we'll introduce here a condition. So if the input string, if the length of the input string, which can be done like this, input string equals 1, then the return is true. Now, for all the other cases, we'll want to check continuously if the first and the last letter are the same. To do this, I will actually just manipulate input string. So first we'll get the length, rent length of this, which will be given by the same argument we used before. There. And now we know what the actual length is, right? And now we want to check for all of those combinations whether it's the same as the last one. So this time I will use a while loop, and I'll just write current len is larger than 1. Because if you have a 1 and you got to that point, that means that it is a palindrome. And if you have any other number, you will still want to compare both elements, right? So now you have this loop cycle, and we will want to check if the first character is the same as the last one. In this case, we'll actually do the opposite. We'll check if they're different, because if they're different, then we can just simply know that this is not a palindrome and be done with it, right? So we will just go like this. If the first element, which will be input string, in its first space, which will be the case 0, is different from the input string. And there's a couple of ways to do this. You can just go current len -1, -1, but you can also just go like this, -1, which will always give you the last element. I like it better when it's written like this because it's a bit more obvious, but that's one of the beauties of Python, that you can just pretty much write things however you like and you get pretty good results. But now, if they're different, then we don't care about the rest of the string, right? So we'll just return false. But what if they are actually the same? Then we'll want to keep all of the string except for those two characters, right? So now we'll just take input string equals input string, and we'll want to take from the second space, which will be space 1, until, and remember that the second limit of an array, when you write it in this format, will be exclusive. So we'll just write exactly like this, current len -1. And that should pretty much solve it. Now, what does this mean? That since we're taking away 2 elements, we can just calculate the current length the same as we did before, but that's a bit more time consuming, so we can just know that we have removed 2 elements. Just know that current len equals current len -2. So this should cycle through the whole thing, and then we can just, if we get through this without ever returning false, then we know that this word is in fact a palindrome. So we'll just write return true. Now, that's my first approach. And this might require some debugging, so as always, we'll have to run some tests. Oh, it passed everything on the first try. That's good. Now let's see if it actually goes through the whole thing. Perfect. So we got it in the first try. Again, this one is not that troublesome, but it is a bit trickier than the last ones. Yeah, sure, it's great. Submit. And now we have finished the first chapter, and we can start the second chapter. I will stop the video now because it's almost getting to 10 minutes. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them down here. If you find any better solutions, also put them down in the comments. I'm sure everyone will really appreciate seeing them. And well, that's it. Until next time.